the hit on Davos historically has been that it's a lot of people who already have access to resources and opportunities getting together, and in too many instances, especially in the past, I think it's just resulted in those people gaining access to more resources and opportunities. When this platform works the way it should, and the work that we're doing, I hope, is a stellar example of that, we're able to broaden the range of voices, we're able to broaden the range of solutions that are available to people around the world.
Better Innovation is hosted by Jeff Saviano, EY Global Tax Innovation Leader. This isn't just about innovation. This is better innovation.
Hey everyone, Better Innovation. I'm your host, Jeff Saviano. This is another episode we recorded live from the World Economic Forum in Davos this year. It's one in our 6-part series, interviewed thought leaders from Davos who attended the World Economic Forum. Today, we have 2 of our guests together in studio, Dante Disparte and Tomicah Tillemann. If you're an avid Better Innovation listener, you know that I interviewed Tomicah and Dante in our last 2 episodes. 2, I think, great one-on-one interviews. Today is the 3 of us together in studio. We explore the creation of digital public goods. We talk about social and civic innovation, advanced technology trends, but mainly, why are we in Davos again? Why do we keep coming back? What's so special about the World Economic Forum in Davos? The theme this year is the development of solutions through collaboration. It seemed like every session I went to, we were learning about the convergence of technology and the governance, but how organizations are aligning and collaborating to build just amazing new digital goods. I think you'll get a sense today of how aligned and close Dante and Tomicah are and how they collaborate really well together. Many of our Better Innovation episodes, I hope you find, are really informative. We try to bring that to you in each episode. I think this one is too. There's definitely lots to learn from Tomicah and Dante, but I have to say, I had some fun with this one. I was looking forward to do this one for a long time. Dante Disparte, Tomicah Tillemann on Better Innovation. Dante, Tomicah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
Likewise. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, can I start with a confession?
By all means.
Is that okay? So I have a wish list for the Better Innovation podcast, and it's my most sought-after guests, and each of you have graciously agreed to record one-on-one interviews today. Those are great, but I've been looking forward to doing this, the 3 of us together, for a while now. This will be fun.
Well, let's prove us right.
So we met here a year ago. We met in Davos, and this is a special place. How many years have you guys been coming?
I think this is number 5 for me, which is a little sobering. I'm feeling gray as I say that.
It's number 3 for me.
3 for you. This is 2 for me. And I didn't quite know what to expect last year. Actually, you guys were one of the first folks that we met early in the Davos experience last year. And it's been fun. We've actually done some stuff together this year, too, haven't we?
I think the key with Davos is you have to move from aspirational to operational, and very happily for our collaboration, that's what we've seen happen over the last 12 months, so it's been fantastic.
It doesn't always happen that way, does it? Lots of ideas. Everybody has an idea, I find, in Davos.
Well, oftentimes, and 50 years later, of course, this is the 50th anniversary of the World Economic Forum, and oftentimes it takes the right environment, the right climate, and the right relationships to catalyze something.
So we met at the Global Blockchain Business Council last year. They had a forum and lots of great talks there. I'll never forget. So that's where the 3 of us met. And we had another great session there yesterday, too, didn't we? A few of them.
We did. And, the fun of that session is that we got to tell people of our progress. And, the nice thing is when you come back and have something concrete to report.
It was, I can still remember our conversation. There was a spark of a collection of technology and innovation and tax. And that's something that was unique about us and EY and our team's role. And I really do think something sparked in that conversation. We started working together. Ultimately, that's led to Tomicah, what we're calling the Prosperity Collaborative. You want to just talk for a minute about what is the Prosperity Collaborative?
Absolutely. It's a emerging collaboration between some incredible organizations, EY, New America, where I sit, the World Bank, and then MIT. And together we are working to solve a couple of really big challenges related to tax and public finance. The first is that we want to develop digital public goods that will help countries around the world and jurisdictions around the world do a better job of fairly and efficiently collecting tax and moving revenue into government. The second thing that we're focused on is ensuring that once you get those resources inside of government, they're used accountably and in the way that they're supposed to be. And then finally, we want to tackle the storytelling piece of this, because we see tax as a key element of the social contract. And if citizens understand how and why their money is being used to better society, they're going to feel a lot better about putting those resources into the public domain.
I love how you described in the terminology of a digital public good. That's important to you too, Dante, isn't it?
Well, it is indeed. And as you know, I mean, with the work I'm doing right now with the Libra Association, part of what we're building and part of what we're establishing is just that, digital public good or commons. And I think in the tax domain, if you think about the opportunity, this is billions and billions of dollars of what I would characterize as stranded assets that can be pulled back into the system. But to Tomicah's point, you need to not only address the perception issue, you need to also address the real functional mechanics that preclude a lot of tax and public revenue to be pulled into the system in the first place.
I have to say, one of the themes, not only from this year's Davos and last year, is this idea of a new way to solve problems. And you've got great institutions solving problems individually sometimes, but there's something unique about this amazing place that we're in, that there's a new way to solve problems that I think is really evolving in the world, leveraging ecosystems and collaborations. And I have to say, in all honesty, I really did learn quite a bit. I am learning quite a bit, Dante, from you and Tomicah and from your work at New America. We talked in our one-on-one interview, Dante, about the Libra Association and the transparency around the governance. But talk a bit, Tomicah, about why ecosystem problem solving is important to you.
Well, I think the 50th anniversary of the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos is a really good moment to look back. And, if you step into your time machine, 5 or 6 decades ago, there were certain challenges that were the domain of government. There were certain challenges that were the domain of the private sector. And then there were certain challenges that we left to civil society. And that more or less worked for a couple of decades in the aftermath of the Second World War. Today, we're living in a world where there is not a single problem worth solving that can be solved by any of those actors on their own.
That's a really powerful statement, isn't it? Perhaps they could attempt to solve it, but they wouldn't achieve the magic that the collaborative could.
It's not going to be, whatever solution you come up with is not going to be as enduring or as efficient as a collaboration between these different sectors. And to the extent you're able to leverage the comparative advantages that exist within these different communities, you can do things that you would never be able to imagine otherwise.
You could certainly move faster, and I love how when you look at ways to, if you want efficient decision making, if you want to move really fast, then form a homogenous group of like-minded people with similar backgrounds. But that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about moving quickly. We're talking about moving most effectively, right, Dante?
There's a good adage to this, which is that if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. I think Tomicah rightly laid out the use case that intense, deep, often uncomfortable cross-sector collaboration, it may very well be the only way we could arrest the tragedy of the commons, start to address some enormous global issues. As I've joked historically with Tom Ridge, the first Secretary of Homeland Security, a Zika-carrying mosquito doesn't check in with TSA. And in that type of operating environment, you cannot assume that the private sector alone has the answers, nor can you necessarily rely on the public sector, especially not when you're not funding it. And this is where I think the tax linkage and the pay-to-play model and having some financial skin in the game can go a long way.
Give us an example. I think that our Better Innovation audience would love an example to make it real. Let's provide some context of an example in the world, a problem that you have seen successfully, different organizations coming together, maybe it's public sector, private, civil society, and has really had a breakthrough that was different perhaps than any one of them could have achieved.
I'll pick one which is well known and which is intriguing to me because it's been midwifed by many of the organizations that have helped midwife some of the early stages of our collaboration, which is the Global Alliance for Vaccination and Immunization, Gavi. And if you look back 20 years ago, there was a compelling need to bring vaccination and public health solutions to the global south, and yet for a bunch of reasons, it just wasn't happening.
Why do you think that is?
The infrastructure that needed to exist either wasn't there or it was being harnessed really inefficiently, and governments didn't have the wherewithal or the resources available, the flexible resources available, to create that infrastructure and the broader overarching game plan that was going to be needed to solve this problem. And you fast forward ahead to where we are now, you saw a series of philanthropic actors who were willing to commit the early risk capital required to build out the infrastructure, to build out some of the overarching solutions that would make it easier for public sector and civil society and private sector actors to work together. And then once that infrastructure was in place, we've now had, as best I recall, 750 million people vaccinated through Gavi's efforts.
That's an incredible
and tens
number.
of millions of lives saved. And I think we're in a similar place right now as it relates to digital public goods and fixing the public sector. And again, I think tax is kind of the prime example of that. We've got a market failure right now. We know that there are hundreds of billions of dollars in resources that could be harnessed productively and effectively if you had the right infrastructure in place. But we're going to have to de-risk the creation of that infrastructure if we're going to get where we want to go. And if we do that effectively, we're going to change the world, and it's going to be pretty exciting.
It's a great example, Dante, isn't it, of one where you could have any of those individual actors that you mentioned could have achieved something, but what a great example of a breakthrough. And I see the work that you guys have done together. You've had different roles over the past 4 or 5 years or so, but you come together at different points and help and support each other. And the institutions that you represent are better off for those collaborations.
Mm-hmm. Well, no doubt. And, what I would characterize as these uncommon coalitions, they might feel very unnatural at first. It takes an enormously long time to really get them turning over and gelling. But when we start to realize that you could create a lot of leverage, right? The public sector has an inherent trust, especially in democratic environments, and that trust is enshrined in the vote and the representation of people. The private sector, frankly, has an embarrassment of riches, right? We're sitting astride potentially trillions of dollars in the global economy looking for yield. And in that environment, and this is another body of work Tomicah and I have collaborated on, you need to start recalibrating what does it mean to have a long-term investment horizon. If you're an investor or a large asset manager or a bank or other financial institutions, and your operating model presupposes predictability and future certainty, a small nominal investment today is the best thing we can do to guarantee that future state that your operating model relies on. And the best way to now start to de-risk that and create leverage is through these uncommon coalitions.
Is this only applicable for the biggest problems in the world, or let's bring it down to those could be from our audience. You could have a mid-level executive at a global 1,000 company, could be somebody in a finance minister of a country that it seems as though that you're dealing with issues and decision-making at all levels. Is this scalable for one of those representatives from our audience and what they're dealing with?
Well, I'd have two answers on that. If you want to sell a widget, you can benefit from multi-stakeholder engagement. You can benefit from leveraging the capabilities that exist within other sectors, but it may not be necessary to sell a widget.
Yeah.
If you want to solve a complicated problem, and unfortunately we live in a world with a lot of complicated problems, these types of multi-stakeholder initiatives are really the only enduring source of legitimacy that we have left. You need everyone at the table. And I will misappropriate Winston Churchill's comment about democracy. They may be the worst possible solution, except for all of the other solutions.
I love that.
It's not easy to do this work. We shouldn't delude ourselves into thinking that this is simple, but this is the only way that you're going to be able to build lasting, long-term solutions that solve big problems and address some of the big sustainability and stability challenges that Dante was referring to a moment ago.
And yes, it does scale down. right? These uncommon coalitions scale down, and how I would characterize it for the listening audience is real deep commitments to diversity and inclusion. Right, that more diverse organizations, and that's ultimately what Tomicah's examples represent, where you get deep cross-sector collaboration, is represented, in my view, in how teams are constructed. The same people making the same decisions as we have had for the last 50 years are predictably producing the same outcomes. And so one of the reasons that is the case is we simply don't have around boardroom tables and management team tables and in working teams at the mid-level enough representation of different views and different stakeholders. So diversity and inclusion can't just be lipstick and window dressing. We have to demonstrate real deep commitments to participation and to meritocracy and to sort of bringing these disparate voices to these challenges.
It's certainly important, for example, at the board level of that Global 1000 organization, but even below the board level, Tomicah, as you said a minute ago, if you're dealing with a complex problem, right, the more complex it is, to look for diversity of opinion, diversity of thought, Dante, diversity of experience. It could be generational diversity, right? Diversity of educational experience and backgrounds. And the more diverse it is, then you're going to get those different thoughts on the table. One of the leaders at EY who formed a lab about 4 years ago, her founding principle in forming the lab was to have as many people from different nations as she could collect within one lab. And she talked about it when they would address issues, as you said, Dante, form teams as diverse as that. It was really hard. It was messy. It's really messy. It's not quick, but the results can be magical.
I want to say one additional word on this specifically as it relates to your American audience, and I realize you have global listeners. But in the United States, we have, in the last few decades, gotten to a dangerous place where we are not casting a broad enough net for solutions. It used to be historically we were the magnet for global talent, and so we could import the best thinking from all over the planet, and we were really efficient in that. That's not what's happening right now, and by virtue of that, you see examples popping up all over the place where countries are leapfrogging the United States because we don't have enough diversity of thinking in our decision-making. One quick concrete thing on this, and then I'll stop talking. Public infrastructure, it costs about 3 to 10 times as much to build a mile of subway in the U.S. as it does anywhere else in the world. And nobody could figure out why that was the case. And finally, the transit managers started talking to each other and realized that when they were benchmarking other jurisdictions, they were only going to other U.S. jurisdictions. And so there was a generation of innovation that had occurred in Asia and Europe that allowed them to bring down cost that just hadn't made it to the United States.
This hermetically sealed bubble, a cocoon existed, and there was no penetration into that cocoon.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. That is a really good example of it. And I do think, to come back to our listening audience, that the message, if you're dealing with a complicated question, to really think about the people around the table. To come back to Davos, and each of you have been here multiple times, you'll keep coming in future years. This is a special place for you?
Yeah, it is undoubtedly a very special place. I think, as I have said before, being a very big believer in serendipity, and if you want to change the system, somehow you have to operate within it. And around these alpine hills, you have quite a lot of concentration of intellectual firepower, economic firepower, market firepower, and most of all, humanity's authority to drive change. I don't think the folks and the organizers at the World Economic Forum are not listening to what's going on the planet. They're trying to concentrate it in actionable agenda items that can be taken forward. So I will hopefully continue to come back and be invited back, in no small measure because of the types of connections that we can make and the initiatives that can then be launched that can make a real difference.
Not the easiest place in the world to get to, and as you said yesterday to Mike on the panel we were at together, as you're climbing over snowbanks and just trying to keep upright and not falling down, and not every conversation is going to change the world, but some of them can.
Well, and I think the hit on Davos historically has been that it's a lot of people who already have access to resources and opportunities getting together. And in too many instances, especially in the past, I think it's just resulted in those people gaining access to more resources and opportunities. when this platform works the way it should, and the work that we're doing, I hope, is a stellar example of that.
Yeah, me too.
We're able to broaden the range of voices. We're able to broaden the range of solutions that are available to people around the world. And hopefully that's the goal that we're moving together today.
It's a good way to put it. And I hope that we can do this again someday. You guys will have another appearance on the podcast, perhaps someday, as we make more progress with the Prosperity Collaborative, and Dante, to have you come back and to talk about all the great work that you're doing with the Libra Association.
Well, I think the key would be, and I'd be delighted to come back, and I'd be delighted to come back in the context of not the conditional statements of what we would do and what we would like to do, but rather the statements of what we have done and what the real impact has been.
Yeah, well said. That's right. That's right. And I do think it was in a session earlier today, and they talked a bit about that. There's really not a lot of accountability over the years at Davos and some of the promises that are made and initiatives that are launched. You can't walk a block here without finding somebody who's launching a book, or there's a new initiative. That there's a lot of launches here. But how often do we, and I think it's really a good lesson for all of us, do we do a post-mortem and go back and look at, are we achieving those things that we really said that we could achieve? And I think that's a healthy exercise for all of us.
Well, and I would, if I can be so bold, Jeff, suggest that we should hold ourselves accountable. So at some point, give or take 12 months from now, we should try to catch up and make sure that we have done what we have set out to deliver. I
love it. Great idea. Well, this has been great fun. I have been looking forward to doing this together with the three of us. I would love to do that. We'll come back in a year or so, and we'll give an update to the world of all the great stuff that's happened.
Until then.
Tax and audit.
That's a good way to end the podcast. How do you end it any other way than about taxes, I suppose. Thank you guys for appearing today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been Better Innovation from EY. Let us know what you think about the show by leaving a review or by reaching out to Jeff at jeffrey.saviano@ey.com or find him on Twitter at Jeffrey Saviano. Better Innovation is produced by the great team at Hogarth Worldwide.